بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وأهل بيته الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين. قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وما تلك بيمينك يا موسى وما تلك بيمينك يا موسى قال هي عصاي أتوكل عليها وأهش بها على غنمي ولي فيها معارب أخرى. قال ألقها يا موسى فألقاها فإذا هي حية تسعى. قال خذها ولا تخف سنعيدها سيرتها الأولى. صدق الله العلي العظيم. In the translation, what is that in your right hand, O Moses? He said, it is my staff. I lean upon it, and I bring down leaves for my sheep, and I have therein other uses. He said, throw it down, O Moses. So he threw it down, and thereupon it was a snake, moving swiftly. He said, seize it, and fear not, we will return it to its former condition. So this is from the story of Musa alayhi salam, when he has his first revelation, it seems, from God, where God speaks to him. And he wants to familiarize Moses with his mission. But before doing that, he has a discussion about Moses and his staff. And it's interesting that God asks Moses a question which, of course, he already knows the answer. What is that in your right hand, O Moses? Moses answers, and he says, it's my staff, and he gives us what he means by his staff. He says, قَالَ هِيَ عَصَايَ, it's my staff. And then he elaborates on what it means that it's my staff. What is a staff? It's something I lean upon. I bring down leaves for my sheep. I have therein other uses. And God then says, okay, now that I know what it is, as in now that you've told me what it is, throw it down, Moses. And Moses throws it down, and it becomes a snake moving swiftly. فَإِذَا هِيَ حَيَّةٌ تَسْعَى. And it becomes a snake moving swiftly. And then he says, seize it and fear not, we'll return it to its former condition. What is the interesting thing about this, beyond the fact that actually God is asking a question which he already knows the answer, and that Moses actually elaborates on the answer? He doesn't simply say my staff. Well, the point is that when somebody asks the question, what is that? So what is that? The answer that Moses gives is a good example of how we would normally answer. First, we give a name to it, to the whole thing. So what is that thing in your right hand? That thing is my staff. And then we continue discussing about its qualities. Often its functions. If it's an artifact, often we discuss its functions or its place, its role in our lives. I lean upon it. I bring down leaves for my sheep, and I have other uses. This I have other uses is a bit like our etc. There are many things that I can explain about my staff, that I can do with my staff, but you get the picture. And the reason I think that we have to speak like this is because indeed there are so many uses in things and so many qualities in things that we don't actually think about when we think about the thing. we have to reflect on it. We have to reflect on our lives and reflect exactly in which parts of our lives this object plays a role. Without the thinking, without the reflection, we do not make explicit, and sometimes we might not even recognize the various functions or qualities of a thing. But this is the interesting point, that we do not need to think about, discuss, or even know, recognize the qualities of a thing, and yet to be able to know the thing itself. What is that? It's my staff. There are many qualities, some of which I recognize and explain, some of which I recognize but don't explain, and some of which I don't even recognize. But it doesn't matter, because the thing itself has nothing to do with all those qualities, and well, it's different from, distinct from all those qualities. I lean upon it, but that's not what it is. It's something I do with it. It brings down leaves for my sheep, but that's not what it is. It's something I do with it. One can say it's an extended piece of wood, but again, at the same time, you might say if it was not an extended piece of wood but an extended piece of metal, it could still be a staff. So it's not exactly what it is. Now, so this is a very important question. What something is an object, and how it relates to the qualities and functions. That's a very important philosophical discussion. What a thing is and how it's related to its qualities and functions. And we're not going to look at that today in this manner, but it's something we'll be looking at, inshallah, within a few weeks. But something before I want to continue, this question that God poses, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. وَمَا تِلْكَ, مَا تِلْكَ means what is that. If God wanted to say what is it, he would have said وَمَا هِيَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. وَمَا هِيَ, مَا هِيَ, what is it? مَا هِيَ is a question, but when it turns into a sort of noun, it becomes مَا هِيَ. مَا هِيَ, the quiddity of something, or sometimes translated as the essence of something. That which answers to the question, what is it? So if you think about various objects in the world and their qualities, we may ask about an object, does it exist? Has it always existed? Will it continue to exist? We talk about its existence. We may ask about how it is, an object, whether it's large or small, whether it's extended or whether it's long or short, whether it's red, green or yellow. So one question is how is it, and another question is what is it? And what an object is something without which the object cannot be, right? Because if you take out something's whatness, then it's no longer that which it is. You can change its qualities sometimes. Some of its qualities, how it is. Something which might be large may become small and yet remain the same thing. You will still answer the same way when you're asked, what is it? The staff, and this is actually the topic of today, the staff on which I lean, I might cut in. I might break a bit of the top of the staff, and still remains a staff because I can still lean upon it. It still brings down leaves for the sheep, and still has those same other uses. Still made of the same material. It's just that a bit of it at the top has been cut off. And then, of course, there's interesting puzzles about this, about how much can you subtract from a thing and still have it remain the same. And that's the topic of today. But this topic, idea of an object changing, we don't need to really imagine anything outside the text. The Quran immediately gives us a change. قَالَ أَلْقِهَا يَا مُوسَى. He said, throw it down, O Moses. An action. Throw it down. Okay. You throw a staff down. If anyone has a staff, a stick, a walking stick, throw it down. What happens? It remains a walking stick. But when قَالَ أَلْقِهَا يَا مُوسَى فَأَلْقَاهَا. But when Moses threw it down, فَإِذَا هِيَ حَيَّةٌ تَسْعَى. Thereupon it was a snake. It became a snake, moving swiftly. What was solid and stable and stationary is now a moving, swift snake. A change has occurred. This now poses a question. Before I actually say what question is being posed, let's read the next verse, the last verse I recited. قَالَ خُذْهَا وَلَا تَخَفْ سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. Seize it and fear not. We will return it to its former condition. Now, first question. When God says قَالَ خُذْهَا, seize it, what does the pronoun it refer to? It could refer to hayya, it's feminine, her. It could refer to hayya, the snake. It could refer, in fact, to the staff. Asa is also here, it's also feminine. Qala hiya asaya. What is the her? Is it the snake? Is it the staff? Or is it the same object? This is the question that's being posed. Now, we might say it's the snake here, because that's the thing which is at the moment slithering in front of him. But is it a different thing? Is the snake different from the staff? سَنُعِيدُهَا, we will return it. سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى, its former condition. That means that the snake has a former condition and a present condition, and then it's going to be returned to its former condition. It's the one, as if one single continuous entity which had a one condition. This poses an interesting question. The thing that was a staff, that thing has become a snake, that thing is becoming a staff again. That's one way of looking at it. But is that really what's happening? Or is it that there is the staff, it's destroyed as it becomes, it's in traditional Aristotelian language translated into English, it's corrupted, corrupting meaning degenerating. It doesn't have a moral overtone, it's just simply degenerating. So corruption, degeneration, and while the staff is being degenerated, a snake is being generated, not the same object changing conditions, changing qualities, not the same object changing qualities. I won't use the word condition, but qualities. Not the same object changing qualities, but the material of the object, the first object, changing, so that the first object is destroyed or is corrupted, a new object takes its place, the material remains the same, but the form that governs that material is different. That's another way of putting it. So the first way of looking at it was that there was one single object that changes qualities, and the second is that there are three phases. Each phase is its own object. It's a change of object. I'll rephrase that. So one way of looking at it is as a single object, three phases of that single object. Each phase is a different quality. The first quality, a new quality, and then a return to the first quality. That's how we can picture it. Another way of looking at it is that there's not one single object. There is in fact a single substrate, but the substrate isn't a single subject. It requires a form to make it an object. There are three phases of this substrate. The first phase is the object, which is the staff. The second phase is a new object entirely, and it's a snake. And the third is the object of a staff. And here I want to pose another question soon about the first staff and then the second staff, which has the middle snake. These questions are not just word games, and it's important to recognize this. These questions are riddles that come about, and we recognize them to come about through a confusion of concepts. When the concepts that we use suddenly seem to come into contradiction at certain points, at the margins of our speech, that is, at the margins of our language. That is, when our language seems to reach a point where it can no longer sustain the same vocabulary, the same expressions, the same way of speaking, and conceptually, that is. And philosophy is, at that point, comes in and says, well, this contradiction of concepts just simply cannot remain. We must sort out this confusion, and we must find a framework and reform our language so that our language is no longer confused and our language manages to match exactly what is happening in reality. And if you look at what science has done, especially say chemistry and physics as well, what they have done, and I'll just look at the chemistry example, what they have done is that they have reduced all the various ways that things can be to a periodic table, common language, where things, letters, do not have any vagueness or lack of clarity or ambiguity. They match the very structure of chemical substances. So when I say hydrogen, that word hydrogen and the letter H isn't a word that has nuances, isn't a word that may be misinterpreted, has no metaphoric sense. It's a word that precisely captures a particular definite structure in reality. It refers to that structure, which is definite and unambiguous and unvague. And by reducing all the substances in the world, all the chemical substances, to a small set, the periodic table, and then all combinations are, after that, explicated through combinations of these units. So instead of talking about salt, we talk about table salt, for example, cooking salt. We no longer talk about salt in that same way when we're doing chemistry. We can be more precise, and we can talk about the structure, the chemical structure, and the combinations necessary for a salt. When we talk about salt in ordinary discourse, we have in our conception the notion of something being salty, a taste, a color, even the whiteness. But when it comes to chemistry, those things are simply qualities, accidental. It is they may arise because of the structure, but they do not answer to the question, what is it? What is salt? It has nothing to do with something which is salt. It has nothing to do with the whiteness. It is to do with a precise chemical structure which can be only expressed in a language which is ideal and perfect, suited for the purpose of describing the world. Okay. So when philosophers also come up with point to these riddles, what they're trying to do is say this is a mass of confusion and it requires clarification to a reduced set of units, of words, of terms, which can iron out the creases and arrange our thinking to match the world. Our minds should be congruent to the way things are in the world. There should be no dissonance. Okay, I won't continue on this vein. I think that's relatively clear. I'll just say that what we are seeing here in these verses isn't something peculiar to a miracle. We can ask these same questions about ordinary objects. We may have a watch, and the watch is working, ticking, 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 and here's a question already. When the hand of the watch is ticking and telling the time, do we have a new watch every second because something is changing in the watch? Well, normally we would say no. The answer. But there have been philosophers who have said that any change whatsoever means that a new object is being created, and we'll discuss that in a moment. But some might say no. The hand of the watch really has nothing to do with the movement of the hand of the watch has nothing to do with the identity of the watch. The watch remains the same. But then the watch becomes broken, and the question is it a watch now? If it doesn't function as a watch, is it a watch? It looks like a watch, but it doesn't work. Imagine a staff which you can't lean upon. It doesn't bring down leaves of the sheep, has no other uses, but it just happens to look like a staff. Whether such a thing is possible, I don't know. But the point is, can we take the function of a thing out of the artifact and still have that artifact to remain the same? Well, suppose you can. What if you have to repair it? What if you change all the internal components of a watch? So you take out all the wheels and cogs and bits and pieces, new hands and new face, and everything is new, but bit by bit, it's done in a very gradual manner. So first one cog is taken out and a new cog is put, and then it still is the same watch, yes or no? We would say yes, and then we would take a pin out and then put a new pin, still same watch, yes, still same watch, and then one hand and then a new hand, and continue that in this way, and then we finally reach a point where it seems that everything has changed, but at every step, all we could say was it's the same watch. So we end up by saying it's the same watch. Two things which really seem to be, in their qualities and in their composition, totally different. That's a riddle. That's a puzzle. What do we do? Philosophy says there's something wrong with our understanding of object and our understanding of sameness and change. We have to understand these concepts a bit better, because the concepts that we're using are clearly only there for they're good for some purposes, so for communication in general. If my watch is broken, I want to go and repair it. I give it to the person who's repairing it, and they say go home and come back in 1 hour. I go home and I come back in an hour, and then he gives me a watch. I want to make sure that the watch he's given me, even though the bits of it that has changed, is still the same watch that I gave him, because I don't want the watch to be someone else's. I don't want it to be a cheaper watch. I don't want it to be a watch I don't like. I don't want to be stealing someone else's watch. It has to be the watch that I bought. And yet, how can it be the watch that I bought, that I possess, that I owned, if it looks different and is structured differently with different components? This is one question that philosophers would ask. Okay. Now, before moving on, I just wanted to make a point. I said that there are three phases in this change in the verse, and I said that you can see it in two different ways, two different lights. One is that there are three phases of the same object. The object is a staff, and that same object is a snake, and then the object returns to it the quality of being a staff. The second picture is to say that there are three objects. There is one substrate, obviously, that's changing, but that's not an object. There is an object which is getting destroyed, and a new object which is coming to existence. And they are two different pictures. It's important to recognize that they're not saying the same thing. Just because one says it's the same object, the second says it's the same substrate, it doesn't mean that we're just using different words for the same concept, for the same conceptual picture. We're not. An object has a definition, a substrate has a definition, and the two definitions are not the same. So if that which is consistent and continuous is an object, is different from saying that which is continuous is a substrate. And I'll give a sort of very crude, perhaps, example of why this is why it's controversial, which way you go. We might talk about a human being who is a child and then grows to become a teenager and then an adult. There are two ways of looking at this. One is that's the same individual soul. The soul remains the same, and that's what gives it the continuity to say that James at age 5 is the same James at age 15, is the same James at age 25, and so on. But we might say that it's not the soul that is continuous. All that is continuous is simply the matter is continuous, the material is continuous. There is no soul. There are different, there is no single mind, if you like. There are mental events that occur, but these events are never, there's nothing stable, there's nothing singular, which begins from the birth and ends at death, say, or continues from death. There is no singular soul or mind. There are mental events, but all that is, the only thing that is singular and consistent is just simply a line of a material line, or simply a process that is undergoing. The only thing that is stable, the only thing that is constant is change, if you like, a particular sort of change. But there is no object, stable object, which remains from birth till death. Okay? So there are two different pictures. One poses a soul which is in essence stable, and the second says that there is no such thing as a singular soul which remains consistent. All that there is a process. The process is that form of the process is constant. It's a constant process, and it's constantly driving in a particular fashion, but there is no stability to any individual unit or part of that process. Okay, so this is two different ontologies, two different conceptual frameworks. I'm not using different words to mean the same thing. And when I said I'll pose a question about how the verse says, قَالَ خُذْهَا سِيرَةً and fear not, وَلَا تَخَفْ سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى, we will return it to its former condition. So to return something to its former condition, one asks, does this mean that the staff which is produced, to which we return, the condition to which we return, that staff, is it the same staff as the staff we began with? Now, or is it a new staff? It's a new staff, but simply looks the same, or is arranged and has the same form as a staff at the beginning. Now, we had two conceptions, two pictures. On one picture, the answer is very simple. If we believe that there is one single object, three phases of a single object, then of course the staff at the end is simply a phase, and the staff at the beginning is simply a phase. They're not two objects or one object. The object is something which can be a snake and a staff. It's common to them both. It's not that an object. We cannot ask the question, is the staff at the beginning the same staff at the end? But because there's only one object anyway, on one picture. On the second picture, where we have three different objects, yes, we can ask the question, is the second object the same as the first object? And in philosophy, this is called the problem of intermittent existence. Intermittent existence, that is, can something exist after having been destroyed? Can an object exist after having been destroyed? Or I should rather say, can something re-exist after having been destroyed? And this is an interesting question, partly because personally I have a feeling that the answer has to be yes. I'm not so sure yet, but the philosophers, Muslim philosophers, for example, Allama Tabatabai, many of the Muslim philosophers, and Allama Tabatabai has in his book discussed this question, and he has come with the answer that it's impossible. It's impossible for something to be destroyed and that same thing, that same object, to return to existence. If something is existing that looks similar, it's just a new thing. It just looks similar. It's a new thing. So this has been discussed in Muslim philosophy.